Ladies and gentlemen, I read a lot of articles about rugby league. I don't know how many of you guys would have picked up on this, but I'm a bit of an NRL fan. Now, NRL articles vary massively in quality, from the absolute drivel that we see put on websites like yahoo.com to the utter literary masterpieces that I used to write for zerotackle.com when I was 15 years old. Coming to think of it, that's kind of messed up, hey? Zerotackle.com benefits of unpaid child labor. No, but in all seriousness, for the record, they had no idea I was 15. And with articles that have aged as brilliantly as why the West Tigers have to stand their ground on Ivan Cleary, I can kind of understand why they didn't realize that I was actually a pubescent teenager writing articles in biology class. One article though that might as well have been written by 15-year-olds is an absolute certified off-season classic put forward by our friends at Fox League. 2024 boom and bust NRL signings. I love it. I absolutely love the entire concept. The fact that there is absolutely no nuance, no grey area. You are either hot or you're not. You are either boom or you're bust. Nobody just, met expectations. You are either one extreme or the other. I read through this article, and some of the takes in it, particularly on the bust side of things, are just such hot garbage that I thought I have to share this with absolutely everybody that I know. So here we are. Today I'm going to take you through it. Special shout out to Mark St. John and Daniel Nuttall for putting together this absolutely sorry excuse for constructive journalism. Articles like this make my content look so good in comparison. And believe me, guys, there's a bit I'll get to later in this video that is just so fundamentally awful that it has to be seen to be believed. First up, they draw viewers in with this brash headline of critiquing players who fail to fire. And then they last exactly 3 sentences before backing down from that claim and saying, while none of the bust signings are purely down to the player, it is fair to say they didn't have the desired effect to improve the team's success. Ah, good. I'm glad we've established that we're going to go about this fairly. And not, call a guy like, Jack Whiten, for example, who won Rabbitohs Player of the Season award, a bust signing just because the club itself had so many issues. Right. Jack Whiten, Raiders to Rabbitohs. He won their Player of the Season award. And they acknowledge it too. Literally, the first line is, Jack Whiten is a great player and was a deserved winner of the George Higgins Medal in 2024. What? So you're saying he was deservedly crowned as the best performing player at the entire club this season, and yet was a bust signing? That signing didn't work. That Jack Whiten individually didn't give the Rabbitohs what he should have given the Rabbitohs. The logic that they use is, quote, he was brought to Souths to help them contend for the title, and instead they contested for the wooden spoon. Saying that based on that, quote, the plan to play Whiten as a centre backfired spectacularly. Right, so let me get this straight. Whiten, a guy who was signed as a centre, would have only met your expectations if he had taken this South Sydney side, with all of its injuries and all of its issues, to a premiership contender while playing centre. That would have just been meeting the expectations that the Fox writers had of him, doing what the Fox writers expected him to do. Quote, the former Blues and Kangaroos star finished the season with solid stats, but Souths had a forgettable season as a team. So are we criticising Jack Whiten or are we criticising the Rabbitohs? Because the big bold heading of Jack Whiten in the bust signing section literally doesn't match anything that you've said here. You're saying individual player wasn't a good signing, and your evidence is that the club didn't do well. Right, so by that logic, Brad Schneider was the greatest signing of the 2024 NRL season because his side won a premiership. Evidently, Fox aren't actually able to critique an individual player's contribution to a team, only the end result. And that's especially true for our next player. Another one that I could not disagree with more, that I think completely misses the point of signing him entirely, is Aiden Caesar to the Tigers. Now, as I said in this video about why the Tigers had a positive season, the Tigers had a clear aim to bring through the next generation of players this year. They knew they weren't going to win a premiership this year, so instead they focused on bringing through young talent that maybe could in the future. And they did. Lockie Galvin, Samuela Fainu, Fanua Bole, Jareem Buller, Sione Fainu, Talon De Silva, the list goes on. They all gained valuable experience this year that will massively pay off for the Tigers down the line. Aiden Caesar being there was a big part of that. A veteran halfback who could come in and solidly steer the team around. Fox League somehow completely missed that point. Again, completely dismissing the individual as a good signing because the club didn't do well. The funniest part about it though is that they didn't even seem to genuinely believe the reasons why they had Aiden Caesar in the bust category. Like they say he didn't bring the quote steadying influence the Tigers would have hoped for, and then literally 2 sentences later praise him for bringing a steady kicking game. The fact is, whether Aiden Caesar was a good signing for the Tigers or not is only something that we're going to find out after 2 or 3 years. Long after he's retired, not now. And with Jerome Leaguie coming to the club next season, I think signing a veteran, steady halfback to help prepare this next generation for Leaguie's arrival was a really good move. I think a lot of these bottom clubs would actually find success more easily if they focused on winning in 5 years rather than desperately trying to win now. But anyway guys, I mentioned earlier that there's a section of this article which is just terrible. If you've got this far into the video, you're probably a person who values players being treated fairly by the media. You're fine with players being criticized, but you know, when the criticism is warranted and productive. Keeping in mind that these players are young men, human beings, with feelings. Congratulations, your moral compass is officially better than Fox League's. You win this I am decent trophy. Granted, maybe I shouldn't be surprised that a media company owned by this guy is incapable of sensing emotions, but they certainly showed that to be true in what they said about Kyle Flanigan. Now I want to start this by reminding you guys of the reality of the Flanigan signing this year. In 2023, Kyle was dropped from the Bulldogs halfback jersey in round 7. He then played a mix of hooker and lock in the New South Wales Cup for a decent chunk of time before eventually being recalled back into the NRL to come off the bench for the rest of the season. When the Dragons signed him, they were signing a 25-year-old utility who was halfway between the bench and New South Wales Cup for the side who finished 3rd last on the ladder. His salary would have been the minimum level the NRL allow, or not far from that. And they didn't even sign him as a starting half. The man who they thought would play 5'8" for them this season was Ronald Volkman, a 21-year-old that they signed from the Warriors. But after he required season-ending surgery, Kyle was the only option they had left. Flanigan starting in the halves this year wasn't the plan. And yet, what they actually managed to get out of him this season relative to his pay packet was absolutely unreal value for money. The utility, who was in his mid-20s and whose NRL career was hanging by a thread, was able to become a really consistent game-managing half for them. He took this Dragons side, who on paper are one of the weakest in the entire competition, to being in the finals race on the last weekend of the season. The signing turned out to be way better than what the Dragons originally thought it would be. To me, Kyle Flanigan was extremely impressive this season. And yes, as you could probably guess, Fox League dismissed him as a bust. Honestly, the best way for me to show you how bad this section is just by going through it. Quote, like the Dragons, Flanigan had a solid season, but he hardly lit the house on fire as a playmaker alongside Ben Hunt. Sorry, who was expecting this minimum wage utility to light the house on fire? If that was your expectation of Kyle Flanigan, Flanigan's not the problem. The line I take the most issue with though in this entire video is this one. Quote, the fact that the club are even considering not extending Hunt is borderline negligent given the other halves options they have on their books. Jesus Christ, that is so poor. Borderline negligent. You think that's an appropriate thing for a news outlet to write about a player? That's not even to mention, by the way, that this article came out 5 days after the Dragons released Ben Hunt, so this whole part about them considering not extending him, that just proves that they had this article sitting in the backlog for a while and weren't even bothered to properly proofread it when they released it. But to say putting faith in Flanigan to be a starting half next season is borderline negligent is just a fundamentally awful thing to say about a sports player. Now look, there is a space for criticizing players. They choose to work in a high pressure environment like the NRL and accept a reasonable level of scrutiny that comes along with that. But this is miles beyond reasonable scrutiny. Not only is it just an absolutely crap thing to say about a person, but it's genuinely incorrect. They've seemingly just gone, oh, he only had 5 try assists this season. Guess that means he was terrible. Completely unaware of the fact that for the Dragons this year, Flanigan would go through all the tough structural organising of the set, which would allow Hunt to come through and execute at the end. Hunt would come through and put the cherry on top. That was their game plan this season. That line is just baseless, careless, and really mean. Borderline negligent. There are NRL comedy podcasts who wouldn't exaggerate a player's performances to that extent. And what makes it worse is that Fox League, a couple of times a season, love to get all serious about mental health and player well-being. They'll do a serious, hard-hitting episode of Face to Face where they care about a player's redemption story. Or they'll talk about how good it is to see a player return to first grade after working their way back through a tough time. Fox, none of that means anything if at the same time you're writing articles saying that putting faith in a player who we know has struggled in the past is borderline negligent. In reporting about our sport, you owe a duty of care to our players, and this falls so far short of that duty of care. If I were one of Flanigan's Dragons teammates, I would call out this article and minimize in any way I can the access that Fox get to me and my teammates. Because there's reporting on the game, and then there's this. I'm not even going to do the whole like and subscribe thing for this video because it just doesn't feel right. But look, the bigger we make this platform of the Leaguie, the more meaningful these call out videos become. Fox League, that was a truly awful article to write, and I'm going to make sure that people know just how awful it really was.